Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 6 of Footmarks, in which I, Behram Qazi, talk to Jarrod Kimber about his work. And today we're going to talk about something that is very, very hot these days. It is about keeping the faith in Bazball. And this podcast is a direct consequence of all of those words from within the English camp after losing the first Ashes test in Edgbaston. And it's quite startling, really, if you think about it, Jarrod, that England have gone out like in full force to defend Bazball. Ollie Robinson has written a piece on how Bazball is the only way to play cricket and that he has sorted things out with Usman Khwaja. And Jimmy Anderson has gone on and backed Ollie that yes, that aggression is good and that the surface was really, really terrible. And if England continue to produce these sort of surfaces, then that is the end of Jimmy Anderson as we know it. And then lastly, Ollie Robinson, not Ollie Robinson, Zach Crawley has actually gone on and made a prediction that England will win the toss, for starters at Lord's. They will be batting first and will win the test match by 150 runs. So my question is to you that, you know, we all understand the whole entertainment first prerogative of Bazball. Was there even a need to come out with all of these words and a multitude of different, like, contradictory opinions in the aftermath of just one defeat in the first Ashes test? Don't you think it invites or draws unnecessary attention to a model that was somewhat working for the most part?
Yeah, I think they're defending something that I don't think they needed to defend. And by that I mean, even though they'd lost two of the last three test matches, or the last two major ones, even though there was more people going, well, you know, don't know about that first innings declaration and a few of the other smaller things that happened, this wasn't like a normal England Ashes loss where suddenly they were being beset by angry people or like, you know, throw out the whole team, let's get rid of everyone and let's start again. As far as I had seen, that wasn't happening. And yet they've come out like that had been happening, right? Like we need to defend everything at all costs. And I think Barney Rooney's article is really interesting because he talks about it as a cult. And I think what we've really seen from Ollie Robinson and Zach Crawley, and also from the words of Brendon McCullum, is that sort of cult-like thing. Whereas, like we felt like we've won. You can say that you felt like you played better cricket. I don't think feeling like you've won. The best way of putting this is for people who don't follow American sports. They talk about good wins and bad wins, and good losses and bad losses. Right? This is something that's we don't talk about much in cricket. In cricket, you either won or you lost, and you should be happy or sad, which isn't really the truth, right? And there are elements that I get that England should be thinking of this as a good loss. They managed to slow Marnus and Smith down, right? Two of the bowlers didn't do very much. You know, Warner didn't, you know, get on top of them. All these different things, all these little micro battles that they did very well with. I understand absolutely all of that. And I think that it would have been great if they would have come out and said, look, we played really good cricket. We think we controlled this game, and we lost it at the end. We believe that if we continue to play at this level, we will win this entire series going through like this. That's not what they did. They said, we feel like we've won, which they can't possibly have. And then they basically doubled down on the whole thing as a mantra. And my issue with this as a cricket person is I get the positivity and I get the way of freeing the players and not making them feel like they didn't lose. Right? Because you want to keep them free and loose so that they attack the next game. But they also made a buttload of mistakes in this game. And it would have been great for them to go, we controlled this game, but we didn't win it. And why we didn't win it was a couple of key things. We're going to fix those in the next one. And if we can learn the lessons from the first test, play a little bit better in that next test, we should be able to win this series. There's no reason why they can't still win this 3-1 or 4-1, right? Like, they have... Australia at the moment basically turned up to a test match with 4 players in form. We don't know how Australia's going to bounce back. They might be right with that, and I like their thinking of it. But once it becomes unthinking, and what Zach Crawley said is unthinking, it doesn't make any sense what he said. Because no one who's ever played cricket would claim that we're going to win by 150 runs, knowing that you might win by 7 wickets. You might win by an innings and 10 runs. It doesn't. There's no thinking behind this anymore. And a lot of the stuff that Robinson said that was involved with McCullum and other people in the change room, again, sounds like a lack of thinking. And my issue with this is that Bazball is seen as vibes-based, right? But a lot of what they do in Bazball has sound cricket logic behind it, right? And really makes a lot of sense. claiming that you've won a test that you haven't won is not that. That's just Donald Trump. And at that stage, eventually what happens is, and there are certain teams you could do this with, but I actually think that the England team is a very, very smart cricket team. A lot of very, very talented and smart players, very experienced players. How long before they start to go, wait, what? What are we talking about here? And that once that illusion breaks, that's where I worry about it. The cricket side, I'm not particularly that worried about at all. But we must believe in Bazball harder than we believed before. Maybe we didn't believe in Bazball hard enough. That's just utter nonsense.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you bring up Barney Rone's piece, of course. For those of you who haven't read it, in the piece, Barney likens Bazball to a cult, and he makes some very solid arguments. And I guess at the base of it all is the very, very basic argument that you just cannot question Bazball or Brendon McCullum anymore. Like, that is not part of, the belief system of Bazball. And I think that's quite ridiculous because, like Jarrod said, like you said, Jarrod, like if you come out and say things like, oh, it feels like we've won, lads, but you've not won. And you can't all forever keep throwing this sort of narrative that, oh, this is for the best interest of test cricket, and at the macro level, this is what we want. This loss feels like a win. This is going to run out at some point. And it's just that, the word cult is very loaded, but then again, you are not questioning the flaws of Bazball or even anything that comes out of Brendon McCullum's mouth. It's termed sacrosanct or sacred, and I think that's where the problem lies. And do you think that this kills away any room for introspection and actually getting better as a team?
Yes, I do, and I think the tenets of Bazball. I think there's two different kinds of Bazball, right? Mm-hmm. There is the cricket decisions that they made. And then you have the culture of Bazball. And I think they're both very important in different ways. But if you just look at the cricket decisions, if you get to a situation where where McCullum or Stokes, because I think Stokes is a huge part of this as well, cannot be questioned. And so, if I worked in a team, what I would like after that loss is to have a really big chat of, if we did boss that game all the way through, why did we still lose it, right? Did we do things that are there things that we can fix, right? And if you listen to Ollie Robinson, and look, Ollie Robinson is not a writer and probably spoke to someone at Wisden on the phone. I don't want to throw his ghostwriter under the phone, but I've got a good guess of who his ghostwriter was in that situation. I'm not even a guess. I know who it was because I've already talked to people. But, I'm not expecting Ollie Robinson to have all the nuance and everything else. But if they don't come out of that game as a professional team and actually have a good talk about it and actually say, forget we almost won, lads. That's absolute nonsense. So let's just move that away, right? But if they're not sitting there going, okay, we did this right, we did this right, we did this right, but we did this wrong. Can we try this differently? Did we do this for the right reasons? Did we declare for the right reasons, right? And I think there are sound cricket reasons why they should have declared. It didn't work. They did declare against New Zealand in that previous test at a similar stage. It was a session later, but at a similar stage, 8 wickets down, and it did work, right? So we already know they've had some success there. But again, asking themselves all of these sorts of questions is how I think you get better. So when I work with cricket teams, my favorite games were the losses that we just lost, because that's when everyone wants to talk. That's when everyone's like, he did this wrong and I did this wrong and maybe we shouldn't have done this. And suddenly you have the best conversation. When you get beaten by heaps, no one wants to talk. When you win, no one wants to be critical. It's very hard to be critical after a win. Imagine the Australians coming off. They're swept up in the emotion of that incredible last wicket partnership. It'd be very hard for Andrew McDonald to go, okay, guys, but now it would have taken them days to settle down before they do that. After those sorts of losses, that for me, that is such a crucial time where everyone is at their most honest, everyone's at their most frail. They'll come at you, they'll break down a little bit as a team in front of you, and from that you can go, great, and you can still say, okay, we've had this conversation, we've talked about all the things that we could have done or we should have done or that we can do going ahead, but guys, we were literally one Pat Cummins pull shot going straight up in the air, or one Nathan Lyon being caught by Ben Stokes from winning that game. That's all we were. And we've just identified 7 things that we can do to get better. And I'm not sure that, well, certainly from Ollie Robinson's comments and from Zach Crawley's comments, That doesn't feel like that's what England have thought. Instead, they were just told they're all superhumans and just to go out there and be superhuman again. And the problem with that is that kind of bubble, the cult of which you're talking about there, it lasts for a little while until the bubble pops, right? And I think that's part of what Barney Ronay was trying to say. And I would say it from the same point of view of they don't actually need that, right? They are beyond. After the first and second test of Bazball, they probably needed a certain point of Brendon McCullum walks through walls, so we can walk through walls with him. Now they've won 11 out of 14 tests or whatever it is since that reign. They know the tactics work, right? We know that there's been some counters from other teams and they've got some new challenges and everything else, but they know fundamentally that the tactics work. They've been in the majority of the games, that they have played in that time, and they've won almost all of them, right? They don't now need to believe the bullshit anymore. Now, what they really need to do is just make sure that they keep staying ahead of everyone else and that, that they keep improving. If they think that the only thing to do here is that they didn't attack hard enough, they attacked plenty in this game.
Yeah. Also, it's just, I think you also mentioned this in different words, but they're tooting their own horn, the Bazball horn, at a time where they don't really need to. Everything that they've said would have been written by some journalist anyway. They should have just come out and acknowledged what they did wrong. And coming to what they did wrong, I have a few points on that. One is, of course, their plans versus Pat Cummins and Nathan Lyon. Now, Ollie Robinson might think that Australia have 3 number 11s, but they kind of did the job for Australia. And it's interesting because, they didn't have any enforcer, any express pacer. And they just were bowling these medium-paced bouncers, trying to force a mistake or getting Pat Cummins to hook one or pull one with so many fielders on the leg side, but only one short leg, so you're not really crowding him too much around the bat. I didn't think that was very smart, and if you're coming out and saying we didn't play aggressive enough and that's where we probably lacked, I think you're really trying to ignore the glaring mistake that you made at the end. And also, not just that, when you talk about those declarations, sure, Rawalpindi was one of those declarations that we'll talk about for millennia, if not generations to come, because that's just how amazing it was. They forced a result out of a game that was destined for a draw. But these last 2 declarations, Basin Reserve and now Edgbaston, they have arguably, if not cost England the game, they've brought about a result, and, you can talk about that all you want, but they've, potentially cost England a loss, or they've helped incur England a loss. So that's where I think that this problem has some issues, and it's just all of this positivity or faux positivity at this point. I feel like England are papering over their cracks with Bazball this, Bazball that, and this is the only way to play cricket.
Yeah, I think that's the other big issue for me, because so are we saying BJ Watling wouldn't get into this side? Right? I mean, McCullum made BJ Watling, right? I mean, BJ Watling, I think he played for New Zealand the first time as an opener, didn't do particularly well, disappeared back into first-class cricket. I didn't expect to ever see him play again. He comes back. McCullum obviously, swaps over with the gloves, and Watling plays as a number 6 who blocks the hell out of the ball for days on end, allows the better middle order players to score before him, and then allows the more attacking players after him to score very quickly. That's a really good player in Test cricket. Not to mention he could wicket keep as well. Like, there's
World
so much
Test
to like
champion.
about him. Yeah, and so he can't play in this team, and I think that that is one of the other big issues that I have of the entire side of it, is that it should be about making England the best team that they can be, and the way that they wanted to make the team the best that they could, I believed, was by, backing their strengths right across the board. If they have 2 openers at the moment who I don't think over a long period of time are going to make consistent runs in Test match cricket. I think that Ben Duckett is very good at slightly at the level below. I think when people can come in and bang the ball off a back of a length consistently at a decent pace and move the ball around, I think he's always going to nick off. And I think Zach Crawley has technical issues, and also the fact that he has never made consistent runs in his life before. I think just the combination of those 2 things with those 2 players. So if they do drop one of those players, who comes in to open? If the best opener is a defensive player, can they now not pick him? Because that's kind of the way they've done it. And that's the difference between having a sound tactical plan, right, and having a belief system that you can't challenge, right? They should be able to say, actually, no, we can bring our BJ Watling in. Maybe it's Ben Compton or whoever it may be in the first
Dom
game.
Sibley's second coming.
Dom Sibley, or I don't know, Alistair Cook makes a comeback, right? Whatever it may be. I think in that situation, there should be a flexibility. And that doesn't mean that they throw out every single part of their plan. Because for Bairstow, I would say it's unlocked Roots. It's certainly unlocked Ollie. Ollie Pope couldn't score against spin before, right? And now he plays spin so much better than he ever has before. And at the very least, it's not the same kind of weakness as it was before. It's unlocked so many of their players and changed the way they think about things that it's not a bad tactic for every single player. But it is specifically not, they're not always going to have this as being their best plan for all 11 players. Jimmy Anderson is one of the best dry bowlers in the world. His ability to just say, you're not going to score for the next 8 overs. That's what I'm going to do to you. You are not going to score for the next 8 overs, and I'm going to build pressure that way. They've kind of they don't really go to that anymore, right? So you're talking about strengths that some of their players have had that they're not even using anymore. And I do think from that perspective, it's like, well, that's when the cult nature or the belief nature takes over from the cricket nature. And I think they need a healthy bit of both, because I think England cricket, certainly from where it was, needed the players to feel like they had that. And, McCullum gets a lot of credit for this, but remember, Trevor Bayliss did a very similar thing with the white ball team before that, which is, guys, you can play. Go out and whack it, right? Putting that mindset into players is very, very good. Saying you're not going to get dropped straight away. Saying that if you play a terrible shot, that doesn't mean that, and the newspapers all have a go at you, doesn't mean that, we're going to think any more poorly of you. We are going to look at this as a big picture and how you fit into the system. And even Zach Crawley is a perfect example of probably, 7 or 8 other teams in the world. Zach Crawley's not playing for at the moment. But England are willing to take that chance, which means that players who are better than Zach Crawley feel even more emboldened. I understand all of that. But the minute you stop thinking and you just go off vibes, I think there's a massive issue here. And I do think also that McCullum gets more credit for what happened with New Zealand than he should, because that's what we do in Test cricket or in international cricket. We give captains the most credit. Gary Stead deserves credit. Mike Hesson deserves credit. Kane Williamson deserves credit. All those people in the high performance facilities deserve credit. The New Zealand A facilities. There's a lot of things that went into New Zealand being very, very good. And McCullum was obviously the totem for that. And maybe he was even the driving force. But you need everyone there. And when McCullum was doing that, he was just another cog in the wheel that made that. He might have been the biggest cog, the toughest cog, the most lubricated cog. I don't know how cogs work. But the point is that he was just a part of that incredible machine. Over in England at the moment, it feels like he is God. And that is not a good position for them to be in, because McCullum doesn't always make good decisions. We all saw him bat. He made plenty of terrible decisions. He made plenty of terrible decisions in the field as a captain as well. Everyone does. There's no perfect person. And we have seen at times the sort of this way of thinking about McCullum as this person who cannot make any errors. It's like, well, wait a minute. They are making errors. Every cricket team is going to make errors. It's how you learn from them and use them that is the most important thing. You can't just ignore them because they don't fit your narrative.
Absolutely. And, whenever we talk about sport and cult in the same breath, we talk about the Messiah complex and how you put someone on a pedestal and now everything they do is unmistakable. And I think that is kind of what is happening with Brendon McCullum. Probably not out of his own accord. He's probably not saying that he deserves to be treated in that sort of way, but that is the knock-on effect that we are witnessing. And I think the one fantastic point that you made was that England are going to have to mix some brains with all of that brawn, right? Like, you can't just can't just harp on about aggressive cricket and taking aggressive options. They haven't taken aggressive options all the time. We can see that with their plans versus Pat Cummins at the end as well, and the field setting. So, it does sound like fluff at a point where you're looking at the game and you're like, okay, well, you didn't quite take the aggressive option. But I think the irony over here is that at the heart of Bazball was player utilization, and how England were at the very bottom of Test cricket and they could not have been worse. And then they completely changed their approach because that's what skills, or that's the sort of skill set their players had, or the bulk of their players had. So not being able to adapt and just trying to go gung-ho or more berserk, it just doesn't make sense to me. And what also doesn't make sense to me is how they're imposing Bazball now. Like, why is Ollie Robinson coming and saying that, oh, Australia will have to adapt or change the style of play because eventually Bazball will defeat them? How can you make that claim when they have won the World Test Championship and have defeated you in the opening Ashes Test? It just doesn't sit well with me, and I just feel like, I'm all for this new genre of cricket, but I'm not for this imposition that, hey, this is the only way to play, and if you don't adapt, you will lose after having lost a test match. That's where it gets comical, right?
Yeah, I think it's the person who's just discovered a pyramid marketing scheme, or has just got involved with a new religion, or whatever it may be, or I don't know. They found a weight loss supplement and they want everyone else to try it, right? And it's like, fine, thank you for your words, but actually I don't need to lose weight, or I don't need spiritual enlightening at the moment, or I don't want to be involved in a pyramid marketing scheme. I don't want to sell lipstick and door to door. So that is where England is currently at this whole thing of you have to do what we do or you're not playing good test cricket. Whereas, look, I think there's no question that England are in the top 3 best test playing nations in the world at the moment. But as you just said, Australia won the World Test Championship. India is a very, very good team as well. We know that, England went to New Zealand and played what I would suggest was a fairly poor New Zealand and drew that series, right? The more we think about Pakistan's form, the more we probably question Australia, England, and New Zealand doing well over there compared to maybe other periods of time. They beat South Africa at home 2-1. And South Africa made a monumental error at the toss in one of those games. And no one else has pointed out that much that South Africa is really ordinary. Terrible test-playing nation. And they came to England and won a test in England?
Yeah.
There are signs, right? And I'm a believer in the philosophy of the way that they play, or not the philosophy, of the tactics of Bazball. I really... you're trying to strengthen your strengths. I always think that that's a very good way of going about things. And I certainly believe in that bowlers were so dominant that batters had to do something quite out of the box in order to get back on top of them. And at this stage, you would have to say that, that has been happening. I fundamentally agree with all that sort of stuff. And yet I'm sitting here going, what are we talking about here? Australia is a defensive team. Pat Cummins is a defensive captain. I think they even were under Steve Smith. That really, since Michael Clarke was in charge, I wouldn't say that Australia have had a very progressive captain. They've had slightly more aggressive teams at times. Obviously, if you have Mitchell Johnson in your side, you're probably a little bit more aggressive. If you have even Mitchell Johnson and Ryan Harris, peak David Warner, there are reasons why and Brad Haddon, there are reasons why those teams were a lot more aggressive in this one. This is a different kind of Australia. But they're winning. And the idea that you have to win in one way, and cricket's only enjoyable if you play it the England way, is again, it's just a bizarre thing for a human being to say, let alone to say, as you said, after they have lost the test. So, look, I think that England, I think I put out my power rankings the other day that, England are the most interesting men's team in the world. And I don't think that anyone, Zimbabwe, fascinating. Bangladesh and Scotland have been quite fascinating over recent times as well. Sri Lanka is another one. There's a few different teams that are quite fascinating. England is fascinating in a way that we could get like 10 books written on this era, right? Like it is. I think there's so much colonial hate for England. There's so much old dreary hate for England. There's so much, we never believe that England's any good at anything because they usually ruin it kind of disdain for England. And I understand all of that because I'm of the age that has lived on both sides of that, right? I completely understand that. I grew up as someone who almost didn't want to watch England play because they were so rubbish and so boring at that time. And I understand all of that. But I also understand that what they did in T20 cricket, then in one-day cricket, and now in Test cricket, we haven't seen this before. And it is absolutely fascinating and interesting. And it will be if it fails or if it is successful. You don't need to sell me on this. You declared on day one. I'm there. I'm with you guys. But you still lost the test.
Yeah, it's really startling how they've just gone on to continuously toot their own horn. We're not just talking about one article. There's the Robinson article, there's the Jimmy article, there is the statement from Zach Crawley. There's so much going on over here, and it's just like, I just felt that there was no need. You don't have to sell us on Bazball, even not just as a philosophy, but even as a model that is successful. You've won 11 out of 14 test matches, right? Now, people might be catching on to it and trying different things and adapting, but you still have something that statistically works. And why?
Well, the adapting thing, let me just add to that for 1 second. So, when you watch New Zealand, I was at all the New Zealand tests. I wasn't at all the South African tests. I was at all the New Zealand tests, and I was at the India test. You were watching teams in real time try and work out something that didn't make any sense to them, right? I wrote the piece on day one about how, Bazball, broke the first day of the Ashes. It is really hard to understand how different this is than anything else that teams have ever gone up against before. And New Zealand didn't know what to do, didn't handle it very well. They had injuries all the way through that series as well, which didn't help. Obviously, the balls went soft, which helped England even more. But India came over with slightly more ideas. They thought they were just a better team, would be able to handle it, and they couldn't handle it either, right? The South African series, South Africa's a very poor team. Their bowlers were going to have to do something magical. Dean Elgar makes a mistake, that's fine. Pakistan, again, looked like a team who hadn't thought about how they were going to handle it, didn't know what to do, weren't a very good team at that team, and got blown away. The first series of Bazball 2.0 is when they go to New Zealand. Again, New Zealand didn't pick Trent Bolt. They had injuries to their main bowlers. I mean, they had Kugelline and who was the other guy bowling for them? Blair Tickner. Like, it wasn't a top-level New Zealand bowling attack, and yet they won the second game. Now, part of that was because England left them in the game with the declaration and then the follow-on. But the other reason that they won that game is because they came up with methods that England hadn't had to go up against, right? And we saw the same in this test of, Australia took what New Zealand did to another level of like, okay, your superpower is hitting a lot of fours early on. Well, we're just going to put everyone out, right? And I think it looked worse than it should have, partly because Cummins is more defensive than other captains, but also because usually I think Australia's plan was to have 3 or 4 fielders out on the boundary and 2 or 3 slips in at all times. But they couldn't do that on that wicket. So in the end, it looked like they had no plan. But I actually think it was a little bit more nuanced than that. But the point is that these are counters. And this is what happens. There is no one method that wins you everything. And so, as someone who has followed a lot of basketball, this happens a lot in basketball. You see a team come in with one strategy, right? But by the time they've got to the playoffs, they probably had to go through 2 or 3 different versions of that. And quite often, that one strategy won't work for all opposition anyway, right? This is exactly the same sort of situation. Australia have the bowling ability, the batting depth, and the patience from their captain to be able to withhold some of the Bazball in a way that these other teams haven't, right? So, you had Colin de Grandhomme as the 5th bowler, and then couldn't bowl in Lords. You had Michael Bracewell as the frontline spinner in some of those tests. You had Kugelline, you had Tickner. You had, who batted at number 7 against, was Simon Harmer batted at number 7 for South Africa? You had Pakistan with Pakistan had no bowler who could bowl spin and put pressure on at the same time consistently. So they could either take wickets or look like taking wickets, or they could go, or they could not go for runs. And the inability to have someone who could control the game, one bowler could control the game for them, would have been huge. If they had someone who could bowl 30% of their overs and just go through, like a Harath or someone like that. You keep going through, realize that what England are very good at is exploiting those little weaknesses. They go after, if they think your 4th and 5th bowlers are weak, they will try and destroy them so that your 3 main bowlers will get absolutely tired and will have to overbowl, right? They will find every little thing of that. There's some brilliant stuff in there, but teams are going to work that out, right? And teams are going to start to come in with their and if you look at Australia is so brilliantly set up to counter the Bazball, because you've got Pat Cummins who can bowl bouncers but also doesn't let the pressure off. If they want to bring Mitchell Stark in, they've got a one-day bowler who can take a lot of wickets, who can cause some carnage for them, who also will strengthen their batting just a little bit as well, and can take on their spinners if their spinners aren't quite up to speed. You've got a number 7 who, I don't think Alex Carey's ever going to average like 40 or 45 in Test cricket, but he's like a poor man Sarfaraz, right? Like where he'll average 35, but he'll do it in a way that will upset England at certain times. They've got opening batters who are very, very experienced. Maybe Warner isn't particularly good, but if he gets a wicket that allows him to take control, then you've got the Marnus Smith. You've got head attacking in the middle. You've got Cameron Green's overs. There's a lot that Australia can throw back at this that some of these other teams haven't, and that's because England haven't played under Bazball a team as good as Australia are right now. They didn't play peak New Zealand twice. And they haven't gone up against India, and they haven't gone up against Australia. And those are the best teams in Test cricket at the moment that they would have had to have gone up against. The only other team you might throw in there might be Sri Lanka at home at the moment, just because they've been fantastic as well. That doesn't mean that Bazball doesn't work, because I think Bazball still, they were losing to West Indies before, right? So things have got a lot better. But if you're not in a situation where you're sitting there going, okay, all right, well, we need to tweak this, or we need to fix this, or we need to do whatever, it just feels then you're in a situation where you are allowing yourselves to fall behind because of your beliefs, rather than actually making sure that you do everything right, which is what you were doing beforehand.
And that's what's coming across, right? Like their, immense defense of Bazball rather than the result at all. Like you say, had they come out and said, oh, we tried to do this, but Australia did this well, and that's where the game was lost. And it's, small margins, fine lines. It's not like it was a comprehensive victory or anything, but their overarching defense of Bazball and the way they've come, and there's been immense uproar from all quarters, and I just feel like everyone would have kept the faith anyway right now. You've got 11 wins out of 14. No one would have lost faith just yet. And now they've just, changed the complexion of the series entirely. If we were coming into the series thinking, okay, this is the World Test champions versus the Bazballers. Now you're looking at the pragmatic Australian team versus the arrogant, aggressive boys of England who won't really have anyone question them. And here's another interesting one for you. Now, we have been told that the pitch at Edgbaston was made to order by Ben Stokes, and that was the thinking behind it. Now, you could argue that the curator didn't give them exactly what they wanted, but based on the dissent that we've seen from both Stuart Broad and James Anderson, who went on and wrote a piece on it as well, do you think that this has kind of exposed some of the cracks in that Bazball dressing room, because there seems to be some contradiction, and the way we're projected, or it is projected, that this is some utopian aggressive band of brothers who all share the same belief, till death? Maybe that's not quite the case. Do you think so?
Well, that's what I found interesting about Robinson's piece, was that he said, we think if we get a pitch with a bit of movement on it, we will be able to exploit the Australians. I'm like, but your captain asked for a pitch that wouldn't have any movement on it, right? And he seemed to suggest that the groundsman, and you read Anderson and everyone else, they all sort of blame the groundsman. I was like, well, you asked for a flat pitch and you got a flat pitch. It wasn't a particularly good flat pitch. I wouldn't even say it was that flat a pitch in the end, because kind of no one could score massive runs on it. I saw people comparing it to some of the Pakistani wickets. I was like, Pakistani wickets, you and I would have made runs on. This was a trickier wicket at times. So it wasn't even exactly what they wanted. It was, it was a poor surface. Certainly from an entertainment point of view, it was a poor surface to watch cricket on.
It was a poor English surface. You get the same surface in Sri Lanka, maybe you would have liked it. Who knows?
Yeah, well, if it was in Sri Lanka, it would have done different things, right? It would have been, I think it would have, if it was the same kind of surface in an Asian country, the spin would have been a different kind of a factor. The spin would have been more exciting. Because I don't think outside of a couple of Moeen Ali balls, the spin was particularly exciting. It was effective, but not exciting. So I think from that perspective, it's very weird that Ollie Robinson has come out and said that. I think there's absolutely no doubt that there is now another schism opening up within that team, and they could win the next 3 or 4 Ashes tests and win. As I said, they could still win this 4-1, still within the realms of possibility. I didn't think Australia played particularly well. There's 2 ways of looking at Australia, right? You can say they didn't play particularly well and they still won that test, or you can say they didn't play particularly that well and there's some issues going ahead. It just depends on how you look at it. But England could easily come back and win this series. But there are certainly now, for the first time since this started. So I remember was it last summer? It might have been when they were playing in New Zealand. And everyone was like, this is the greatest experience of our life. You know, after Pakistan and New Zealand, they loved it. They loved being in this kind of environment. They're playing cricket the way that they kind of wanted to always play it, you know, attacking and fun, and everyone saying how great they were and winning games. It was exactly what you want as a professional cricketer. Not long after that, there was certainly some schisms of some people within the England setup questioning the drinking/celebration aspect of it, and how heavy that has become, and how that has become another... If you can't drink as many drinks as someone else, you're not Bazballing your drinks and all this sort of stuff.
Also, just on that same point, I wonder if Zach Crawley had a drink and cigar after this test match because he lost the test, but he performed well. And apparently McCullum always treats him with a drink and cigar when he doesn't perform well. So if anyone has an answer to that question, please, I'd love to know.
That sort of stuff that they're going to is... It's very, you know... I think Barney Ronay might have mentioned Andrew Tate, you know, the misogynist who's now up on charges in Romania. And there is a little bit of... And I don't know McCullum particularly well. We've got a lot of friends in common, and I probably have one drink with him in my life. But I have been around a lot of situations that he's been around, and there's certainly the hard living side of it is something that he's done, and the team has sort of all embraced that. I can promise you that there are people involved in that, whatever it is, 2025 touring party, players, coaches, anyone else, who are not particularly happy with the let's play as hard as we can so we can get an extra day of golf. Let's drink as hard as we can every time we go out and drink. Let's live our life as to the fullest.
Let's not care about the diet and have a bacon sandwich or something along that line.
So there's definitely that's happening. I can I don't want to throw anyone under the bus because these people haven't wanted to come out publicly, and some of them maybe never will. But here's the thing: every time I've covered English cricket, when these rumours have happened, eventually something happens. So, for instance, we talked about the England coaches drinking a lot during the last Ashes, and we had been talking about it for a long period. Suddenly, we have the Graham Thorpe episode, right? The whole thing with Graham Swan, me and George Dobell, independently of each other, kept hearing. Swan is thinking of retiring. Swan is thinking... These things usually come out. Andy Flower, you know, all these things we have heard. It's very rare in England cricket you hear a whisper and it's not backed up by something happening, right? It's, you know, it is like that. And so when you start to hear from more than one source that this is an issue, this is one thing, and this is a big, weird not public, but a big, weird personal thing that is happening. You then start to wonder, is something else is going on? And the other thing I would say is, the reason that these things usually come out is when England start losing.
Yeah.
No one's going to want to write the article I just talked about at the moment, because they would look like they were having a go at a team that's won 11 out of 14, right? England slip behind another test at Lord's. England don't win this test at Lord's. England end up 2-1 down going into the last test. England lose the Ashes. Any of these sorts of situations. The things that I'm hearing, which I know there are certain people that have these issues. I don't know how team-wide it is, because I think a lot of these guys are like, this is the most fun of our life. We're traveling around the world like Vikings, destroying everything, right? But there are other people who don't feel that way. Yeah. I'm very interested to see if that has an effect, because as someone who's followed English cricket media for a long time, that is usually what happens. It's when those articles start to come out that things change quite a bit. And I would not be surprised. You know, one of my favorite is the having a go at all the England staff. Do you remember in the old days, England used to take about 40 people with them on every tour, right? In that sort of, I don't know, 2009 to 2000 and whenever it was. They've slimmed it down a little bit, I think, now. When they were winning, the press never mentioned it. And then when they lost the Ashes, I want to say in 2013-14, when they lost the Ashes, I think I might be right on those dates, the Sun ran a back page with a photo of every single person on the tour going, how can you win when this many people are involved? That's how English media works, right? That's the interesting thing to go back to. You keep making the same point, which is really, really interesting, which is they're fighting against something that hasn't happened yet. which is the blowback from Bazball not working. There is actually stuff out there that might... I'm talking about one thing that I know. I would say there are other things out there. There is other discontent. And you're talking about the other one is, of course, this whole bowlers versus batters thing, right? So let's just go back to your original question there. When the bowlers are at a situation where they are saying, you can't give us these pitches anymore, right? What happens when they get a green pitch at Lords? Let's pretend that that pitch at Lords is going to stay as green as we saw it was 2 days out. It stays green. And England gets skittled for 110 by Cummins and Hazelwood, right? Very possible. Brilliant bowlers. They get you on morning one. You're all bowled out. Australia get up to 280. England can never get themselves back in the game. Australia win. The first test, the batters asked for a pitch, and they lost. And the second test, the bowlers asked for a pitch, and they lose. These are all possibilities, right? And eventually, what you're talking about is that it's going to open up fault lines within this team. And I think they're fault lines that don't necessarily need to be there. Because I think this team is smart enough, talented enough, and committed enough that they can actually go... There should be proper conversations about this. But because it isn't proper conversations, and it does feel like it's Bazball or bust at this point, I wonder if they have the ability to pull back and change and think about things a little bit differently. Because McCullum made a 300 in UAE. It was before Pakistan, wasn't it?
No. It was against India. I think he made that 300 in New Zealand.
Who's the big? He made a big score against Pakistan.
Yes, he did. Right in the aftermath of Phil Hughes.
Yeah,
he came out and Bazballed the crap out of Pakistan before Bazball was even coined.
So he did that, but then he went off and he played a more defensive innings after that, and we have seen him block. I think I want to say his last Test innings wasn't Bazball, as we know it. I'm pretty sure he was blocking. And I remember there have been plenty of times when I've seen him do defensive moves on the field and everything else. It is more nuanced, right? And once you start to do that, I think it's fine. If you're making everyone buy into one particular creation myth, once they stop believing it, that's an issue. And that seems to be my bigger worry with what they are doing. And this is why it bothers me. I don't care if English cricket fails. It bothers me because this is the most exciting thing to happen in Test cricket since Australia in the late 90s, right? This is the most exciting thing to happen since that era and then the West Indies. We haven't had that many fascinating eras of Test cricket. And right now is incredibly fascinating. And I don't want it to fall apart just because they're focusing on the wrong parts of it. Because the actual cricket methods of hitting people off their length, of working for wickets in a way that you never let batters actually feel all that comfortable, of trying to score at a speed that upsets the rhythm of the opposition bowlers. All these different micro things that they're doing, the funky fields and all these sorts of things, they are brilliant to watch, right? And as an Australian who was brought up to think that English cricket was irrelevant and should be culled, right? It's incredible for me to sit here and say that. So I don't want this ride to end. And I don't want it to finish with bullshit. If it finishes, it should finish because Australia or India or Sri Lanka or someone comes up and kills it with cricket. Yeah. They should kill the cricket side of it. They shouldn't kill the PR side of it.
Yeah, because right now it just seems like they're self-sabotaging themselves with all of this talk. And I mean, now they've just put added pressure on themselves, right? Because they've said all of these things and they'll come out at Lords and they're supposed to play more aggressively to win. Like, it's all up in the air. And I think, like, at this point, like you said, if they just focus on all the benefits of Bazball and all of these innovations that they're bringing into the game and how they're changing the landscape of Test cricket at large, those sort of tactics need to be probably looked at more than, this is, a great service to all of cricket and, it's bigger than a win or loss and we're an entertain first sort of team. I think that the fact that England have really made this part of their identity, this whole Bazball narrative, I wouldn't even say philosophy right now because the philosophy and the narrative are a little different right now if you look at it from that lens. I feel like as it starts to cost them more because teams will continue to adapt, and you've given those examples of New Zealand or Australia, if they continue to be positive like they are right now and with their words, it's going to start looking really, really fake. And I think that's where people will catch on to it. And, like you said, if some of the team members, they stop buying into this philosophy, then you have that risk of everything breaking apart. So I guess on a closing note, do you think that this sort of behavior is sustainable in the long run?
No. I think Bazball, as a theory, has lots of legs to it, and I think I absolutely love what you can do. I don't even think we've opened up everything that Bazball can do in Test cricket at the moment. I think there are far more interesting ways of going ahead with it and what you can do with it. But I don't think... the minute you stop thinking, and there's so much thought, Brendon McCullum is so smart. There's so much more smarts that go into Bazball. The minute you stop thinking and it just becomes, we're going to do it because we're going to do it, it doesn't make any sense to me. And I understand if they are making these comments, the Ollie Robinson, Zach Crawley, what McCullum said in the change room, all these sorts of things, and they're saying that because they want to rattle the Australians, right? If that's what they think they are doing, to the rest of us at the moment, it plays completely differently, right? And it doesn't, at a certain point, it shouldn't matter to us what they do in those situations. What should matter is what they do on the field. And what it looks like, and we don't know, we're not in that change room. All we can go on is what Ollie Robinson has told us went on in that change room. Right? But we're not in that change room. But from where we are, you look at the Ollie Robinson comments and the Zach Crawley comments, and they look thick. They look like stupid cricketers who are not particularly thinking that hard about what their fearless leader is saying. Right?
Yeah.
And the one thing I would say about English cricket, pretty much from 2010 onwards, is that there's been a lot of intelligence behind it. When they've been successful, you can usually trace it back to intelligent thought processes and everything else. Doesn't mean they've always got it right and everything. There's a lot of a lot of it has made a lot of sense. Why give that bit up? That's what they do good. You've got Jimmy Anderson, who's got like 10,000 wickets, right? The knowledge that he has, the knowledge that Joe Root has, right? The knowledge that some of these players have. Bairstow, who's manufactured his career 17 different ways at this point. Ollie Robertson, who bowls at 78 miles an hour and has a really good test career. There's so much there from cricket perspective. Do that, right? Follow that. And the interesting thing is, at the moment, is you would say that England have become Australia, right? And they've become Australia in the way that they basically now believe that their method is so much better than everyone else that even when they lose, if you don't play their method, you're actually still not beating them. And there's a lot of us in Australian cricket, that have grown up thinking that is the thing that actually always held Australia back, right?
Interesting.
Australia had better players. And they had a method of attacking cricket that was really, really good. But when Australia stops thinking and just assumes that they're better, they don't even need to know about the opposition and that they can just rock up. The minute they're in a slightly weak playing age, they look a very ordinary team overnight. And then they have to rely on the next Pat Cummins or the next Mitchell Starc or the next Josh Hazlewood or whoever that may be to come up. And luckily for them, they keep creating them. But if you look at the difference between Australia, which has always had these freakish natural players who dominate international cricket, and England, this England team, on paper, is not better than Australia or India right now. It might play a better form of cricket that can win these Ashes. That is not how they're talking. They're talking like they are talking like if you've ever played a video game with someone who sits beside you telling you how you should play better as you're clocking the game. That's what they sound like at the moment, and at the end you're just like, I've got the high score. Shut up, right? Yeah. It's a ridiculous situation to be in. Now, I think what they would say, and they're not that they're going to listen to this podcast, which is a good thing about, I think, modern English cricket. They wouldn't listen to stuff like this, whereas in the old days they certainly did. But what they would say is, we are trying to maintain a certain mental state that we want our players to be in all the time. And I think what myself or Barney Ronay or you would say is, that's fine if it has a basis for existing. If the only basis for existing is that it makes it easier to make decisions and to control everyone, eventually we all assume that is going to burst. And it could burst on the first morning at Lord's, right? And if that's the case, as I said before, I don't want the whole thing to disappear because the whole thing is marvelous. If you're a Test cricket fan right now, and I saw a bunch of Australian fans go, there's an Australian comment on one of my YouTubes going, I can't believe you're saying England's the most interesting team. In what world is England not the most interesting team? They literally just lit Test match cricket on fire just to watch it burn, right? Absolutely fascinating, and we want it to continue. And we also want to see Sri Lanka go with their, and we've already heard that some of the women's teams talk about this. And we've already seen Zimbabwe, under Dave Houghton. People are getting inspired by this stuff of attacking, of feeling confident, of making smart decisions based on what you do best in cricket. It's a brilliant way of playing Test cricket, and I would like to see more people do it. And that is why I want it to be a success. Doesn't necessarily mean I want them to win the Ashes or to win the World Test Championship. But what I don't want is for it to be discarded because they started talking nonsense, and then Australia got on a couple of green tops against them and mopped them up. Or Steve Smith batted for 4 days, and so they couldn't win a Test match, and they went back to something else. It makes sense, and they should be backing it, but they also have to be smart. You can't Bazball and be stupid.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And I also don't want England to change much. I want them to continue to play this way. What I don't want them to do is just come and talk about how great their way of playing is. And that's where I think they've lost a lot of people. But I think we've pretty much summed it up. And I guess everyone else will also have their thoughts and ideas. And you can obviously let us know in the comments. And subscribe to this new channel, Jarrod Kimber Podcast. That's where all the podcasts will be. And we'll be having 2 separate YouTube channels. One for the video essays and other videos, and one for podcasts specifically. But thank you so much for your time, Jarrod, and everyone who tuned in. I think that we'll have a lot more to talk about this particular topic in the few weeks that are ahead of us. But that will be all for now. And yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys. Goodbye.